I'm really pleased that Dolly Turner agreed to moderate this panel. Dolly is founder and CEO of the Turner Group, a content production, programming, marketing, and outreach company here in DC, right? Yeah, which is great. She's a local, and we love that. She's also a board member of the Black House Foundation and on the advisory board for IFP. So without further ado, thank you to Dolly and to all of our panelists for participating, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ken. So good morning, everybody. I think it's really exciting that we have an opportunity to bring or to introduce some of the key stakeholders and leadership of the Documentary Producers Alliance. So I'd like to introduce the panel first, and then we're going to have a discussion for about 50 minutes that's going to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions in between, but we're going to save the last 10 minutes of the panel to get some feedback from you about some concerns or issues or success stories as documentary filmmakers, because this helps inform the organization as they look forward, and it gives them a great idea about what's going on in DC and to just hear from you personally. So first, and I'll have you raise your hand, I'd like to introduce Beth Levison, who helms Hazel Pictures and is one of the founders of the DPA. She's an independent producer, writer, director. She worked at HBO and PBS for over 15 years, as well as National Geographic TV and ABC. She's produced over 20 films, including a lot of award winners, made in Boise, which is destined to be an award winner and is here at the festival and has one more screening. Also 32 Pills, which is on HBO, Lemon, The Boxers of Brule, Personal Statement, The Trials of Spring, Maria Abramovic, and The Economics of Being Environmentally Conscious. She's currently in post on Women in Blue. Next, we have Naomi Walker next to me. She joined the Southern Documentary Fund as executive director in 2016, and previously she worked as a national engagement consultant for several years. She served as outreach director for Good Pitch New York, Good Pitch Chicago, and she's crafted study guides for several documentaries for educators in the classroom, and she was the education director at Cinema Chicago. Next on the end, we have Jameka Autry, who also has a film in the festival, Ernie and Joe, which also has another screening that you want to see while you're here. She's worked as a creative development and production on feature documentaries, narrative films, commercials, short films, and multimedia campaigns. And her films have screened at places like Sundance, Tribeca, and South by Southwest. She produced Marathon, the Patriots' Day bombing, which is now on HBO, In My Father's House, which was on Showtime. She's a line producer on Mangtagni and Maya, MIA, which was at Sundance, consulting producer on We the Animals, and CNN's Love Gilda, and the docuseries The Fashion Fund with Condé Nast and Vogue on Amazon. She's currently working on Through the Night, Down a Dark Stairwell, and her directorial debut, which is very exciting. Lastly, we have Lance Kramer, who's based here in D.C. He's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and executive director, co-founder of the D.C.-based production company Meridian Hill Films. He produced City of Trees, which is now on Netflix and premiered at Full Frame, and also aired on PBS America Reframed, and he produced the Webby Award-winning documentary series The Messy Truth with Van Jones that was released on Facebook and CNN.com. He received the DC Mayor's Arts Award from the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, and he's a board member of Docs in Progress, and he was a participant in the Sundance Creator Producer Summit. So I'd kind of like to, kick off our discussion with Beth, and we'd love to hear a little bit, Beth, about how the organization came together, beginning with your dinner. We'd love to take that journey with you.
Sure. Well, so thank you for Dolly for introducing us. For me, it's really important to say I'm happy to talk about the origins, but the organization would not be what it is without our collective, without being the collective group that we are. So we really are a collective. And we wouldn't be where we are without the support of organizations like the Southern Doc Fund. Naomi's been really helpful to us. So I just want to say I'm happy to tell the origins, but we would not be what we are without the people all the people involved. So basically, I can't believe how long ago this was. I think it was in early 2016. But there were 5 other producers in New York City, all of us women. And we were all, like, some of us were talking to each other and some of the others were talking to others, but we were 6. And we were all in crisis in our careers for really different reasons. And we just kind of wanted to get together, all of us producers, and talk about what was going on and just have like a girls' dinner, which is really how it started. And we met at a restaurant, had dinner, and it turned out to be, it wasn't like a bitch session. It was actually a conversation where we started talking about what was going on, and we realized that there was a lot of resonance, that we were all having shared struggles or struggles that had overlap. And we were all sort of intrigued by what we were hearing from each other. And it really became a very constructive dinner. And then we decided, let's have another dinner. Like, let's have another dinner next month. And we had another dinner, and then we had another. And by within about 3 to 6 months, we realized that the struggles that we were having weren't because we were inadequate or that we were bad at our jobs. It was because there were real structural issues that we were facing that were really bearing down on us as filmmakers. And it was about that 6-month mark that we decided, and other producers started hearing about our dinners and our conversations because we were talking about it. And we thought maybe we should become kind of an organization. Maybe we should just start talking to more people and bringing on more people. So it really started as a dinner that became a series of dinners, and it's a whole long story, or not that long, but we are now over 170 producers nationwide. We advocate on behalf of producers for the health and welfare of the industry, and we are really trying to figure out, from the vantage point of producers, how can this be an industry that works for more people? We started out as sort of having like 6 people who founded it, but that just became kind of meaningless and unsustainable and not productive. And so we have committees, and we are tackling now all different aspects of the industry to try to make it stronger and better. Is that right, you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So tell us, at what point in time as a dinner did you all decide to become a formal organization and then form committees? Because there's a really great grassroots organizing story behind how the DPA came together. So can you talk a little bit about that piece? Because that can help a lot of filmmakers. I think it can inform a lot of the audience about issues that they're working with either locally on their films or how they can grow their local organizations.
Yeah. So we started in January 2016. In July of 2016, we started realizing that Getting Real, the IDA biannual meeting, was happening in 2018. And we decided to write kind of this one-page manifesto about who we were and that we were becoming an organization and why. And we wrote it, and it was published in Real Screen. It's a very flawed, if I look back at it now, it's a flawed first statement, but it was an expression of this is who we are and we are here. And then we participated in Getting Real, and we had panels. And I think it was probably not much later, maybe it was between 6 months and a year later, that we broke out into committees, because we started seeing there's a lot of work to get done, and we will only benefit by having more people who are active in the space and who are empowered. And maybe, Lance or Jameka, if either you guys want to talk about like what the other committees are. Because Lance, you're on more than one, so maybe I'm going to pass the baton.
Sure. Well, do you mind if I jump in for just one moment, Beth, before we get to the nitty-gritty of the committee? So one of the things that you've mentioned is that sustainability is one of like the key pillars of the organization. Can you just talk a little bit about why sustainability was important and kind of what the organization's philosophy is about that and what that really means to producers, to doc producers?
I think that's a really big question. When we first started working together, we were 6 independent documentary producers. 3 of them are no longer independent documentary producers because they couldn't afford to do it anymore. It was just too hard. So I think that producers are and have been facing the challenges that we are often underpaid. We are unfortunately sort of often under-recognized. And what we're seeing also more broadly is our problems that limit access, inclusion, and full participation by filmmakers in the industry. And I love these. I mean, so I think sustainability, it's funny for me, Lance and I were just having this conversation yesterday about the word sustainability. It feels like it kind of came out of the environmental movement, and you know that it's a word that we're all still using. It's a little bit 2016. I think what or was it 2016? Even earlier? Yeah. But I think that we're really trying to break it down. Like, what are the issues that have a bearing on the ability of filmmakers to thrive in this industry, right? So what are the issues related to fair budgeting, and what are the issues related to wage standardization and what people get paid and when? What are the issues surrounding access? What are the issues surrounding fair practices in terms of how projects get supported and who gets paid out and how? You know, there's so many this is a really overused word at the moment, but there's so many intersecting issues, and we're trying to tease them out and sort of look at the industry and what is not working. So it is about producers, the work that we're doing, but it's also just making it an industry that works better for all. Because as producers, we begin very early often on a project, and we are often one of the last to go, and we are the ones that liaise with the outside world. We are often the contacts for our productions to the funders, to the investors, to the festivals. And so we have this bird's eye view, in a way, a detailed and bird's eye view that allows us to sort of see what's working, what's not, and I think we're trying to acupuncture the situation.
Mm-hmm. So Lance, how did you become involved in DPA? What sort of drew you to the organization? And then, I'd love to hear a little bit about your development funding committee.
I got involved in the DPA, I guess officially around in early 2017. This is maybe about a year after it was started. I was at Getting Real in 2016, and I found that just being at that conference at that time was this very, very consequential thing for me as a filmmaker from here, in the sense that I had just come off the heels of having produced my first feature, which was a film called City of Trees. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but it was an incredible experience. I'm very proud of the film, but we came off the heels of having released that film with a lot of debt and not clear about how to continue proceeding forward as independent filmmakers. And so we were in a kind of, I say we, was my brother and I, and some of our close team members were just basically in a similar type of crisis. And I found that the two of us in particular were carrying a lot of shame with that, feeling like we were almost like proud of ourselves for what we had accomplished, but it felt like externally we were a failure because we were carrying this, like, whatever you want to call it, like a ball and chain from all this, financial weight of not having kind of broke even. And I thought that was something I couldn't communicate to others, because, you work in a field where you kind of want to communicate success, and there's a lot of confirmation biases that lead to more success. So if you're vulnerable in that way, I think there's a lot of fear that that can just work against you. And so I was really impressed by how open Beth and Marilyn and others in the DPA, but also, frankly, other people coming at a bunch of different issues at Getting Real were just opening up about these issues and struggles. And so that was an inspiration to me. And that was then kind of very quickly followed up by this convening that happened in DC in, I think, February of 2017, that the IDA and National Endowment for the Arts organized, that was based around sustainability. And so I was there. I think there was a few people here who also were part of that, and that kind of opened up the floodgates further to do additional organizing. Marilyn Ness, who had been a mentor of mine and was one of the co-founders of the DPA at that time, was just like, okay, you're joining. We're roping you in. You're going to be the chair of the development committee.
Okay. Excellent.
She said, we don't have a chair. Now you're the chair. And I was like, okay, all right. And I can say more about it, but that's how I got involved.
And how about you, Jameka?
I came to the DPA after a few years of being an in-house producer and realized that starting my freelance career, I needed a little bit of help and guidance. But also, it was a lot of concern for me personally about issues around inclusion and diversity, which is why I'm on the Equity and Inclusion Committee. Specifically, I think as, a Black woman, I'm also trying to find my place within this documentary field, and it's not been something that's been a straightforward path. I think there are a lot of films that are made about the Black community, but it's hard as a Black person to be able to tell your own stories. And so that's one of the challenges that brought me in to try to do this work, is how can we change the landscape so that, I can tell these stories about my own community and have them accepted to the outside world. The labor and economic sustainability is always at the forefront, I think, of what all of our committees are trying to work on and focus on. But for me personally, I'm trying to make it a mission to figure out how we can cut down some of these barriers, open doors for funding for people of color, also people with disabilities, anything that might be holding us back, because for so long these stories have been out of our grasp and we've been unable to tell them. So I'm trying to help change that narrative and that landscape. And that's what I'm working on at the DPA.
And so, Beth, can you just, because since we have a community of people here who may want to sign up for some of these committees, can one of you talk a little bit about the Labor and Economic Sustainability Committee? Because I expect that everyone here will want to sign up for some committee to help at the end.
Look, if I can just actually talk just a little bit broadly,
Yeah.
because so what we're a national organization. Every other month, the last Tuesday of every other month, we have a national Zoom call where we share the dial-in number, and people dial in from all over the country. So there's, for example, a Chicago chapter, and there's they've kind of chapterized, but 15 Chicago producers get in a room. It's really fun for them. People bring wine and hummus and chips, and then they dial in as a group. We do the same thing in New York. And people dial in right now from about 15 different states. And then all these different committees give updates on what they're working on. And I have to say, they're incredible. The phone calls, the intellectual capital, the experience, the ideas that are expressed on the calls, I think they're really, they give me goosebumps, I have to admit, every time. But if people want to become involved, you just send us your email. We'll give you an onboarding packet which tells you about the organization and our different committees, and then you're invited to join a call. And then if something resonates with you and you feel like you can roll up your sleeves and contribute, then you can join a committee. But even just being on a call, if that's what you can do, it's kind of we welcome that too, because inevitably you're going to go out into the community and enact what we've talked about, or think about it, or it might change your practice, or you can help somebody else. So, to make clear, as an organization, we're not necessarily a networking organization, even though you build your network out of being involved, but we really think of ourselves as a working organization.
And And part of this also is because when you looked at producers in general, producer can be a very open title. Yeah, everybody's shaking their head. So, I mean, we're trying to define what producers actually do to help give some stability to the industry as a whole. Nationwide, we can all have a standard definition of what a producer is, what a line producer is, what a creative producer is, what a associate producer is, all those things, so that there is a lot of more parity, and we can help raise the bar as far as, making sure that people are paid on par.
So, one of the things that I think is really beautiful about your organization and, demonstrates inclusivity right away is that you have regionalized this. Because as we know, a lot of national film organizations, they're located in the major markets, which is New York or Los Angeles. I spent most of my career working in larger markets. And so the access and the availability to information, meeting people, and resources is very different. I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm not sure of any organization like this in Oklahoma, but I want to see Oklahoma stories. And it does feel as though the industry, at least the decision makers around grants and festivals, that they're finally starting to look outside of New York and Los Angeles for stories, and they're recognizing that, hey, there is a great story in Oklahoma or in Idaho or in Miami or New Orleans or Durham, North Carolina. So can you all I'd like to hear from Naomi, who's head of the Southern Documentary Fund and is based in Durham, how the DPA is valuable to your filmmakers that you're working with every day.
Yeah, it was a really fantastic to learn about the DPA and see a draft of the guidelines. And there's an expression, oppression hides in ambiguity. And I felt like the crediting guidelines were making a huge leap towards fighting the lack of clarity around all these different roles. It was really crucial to our field as a whole, and for our region, everybody's wearing so many hats. The word that keeps coming up at our convening that we do every year for Southern Makers is scrappy. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who's just a producer outside of the bigger cities in the South. And so even then, we need a lot more clarity. And I also feel like that that thanks to, I don't know what, Hollywood, Jean-Luc Godard, I don't know whose fault it is, that this whole auteur concept came around, as if a film is made by this one visionary, misogynist French guy. And I also really love the fact that the production guidelines reveal more of a collective sense of what it takes to pull off a film. And so even though our makers are scrappy and they're wearing a lot of hats and they're working on smaller budgets, the DPA guidelines also use percentages. So they're not using rate. It's not a figure. So it takes out an intimidation for makers that are working on smaller budgets. And you can use big and large budgets and use those guidelines in that way. So it's enormously useful. I refer our makers all the time to the guidelines for all kinds of questions they have.
And so, Jameka, I know you were also very passionate about the regionality benefits of this organization, unlike a lot of others. Can you talk a little bit about how how you're applying this or using this in Durham?
Yeah, so just for a little context, I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm still deeply connected, and went to New York for a long stint, and now I'm back in Durham, and then I'm going to be in San Francisco. But the point of all of this is that I was trying to figure out and connect some of the dots about how regional filmmakers tend to be left out of some of these bigger funding grants. We have kind of the same pool of people, if you will, that keep getting grants, and they're from New York, and they're from LA, and, a little bit of San Francisco, but why is this happening? Because the same filmmakers that are in New York are flying into places like Durham, North Carolina, making those films. And, you know, we have a really talented pool of filmmakers in Durham. I'm talking about Durham a lot, but insert your own city. And so why is this happening? And, you know, I'm really trying to kind of break down some barriers and, you know, trying to figure this out. And I think it's a lot to do with, you know, some of the budgets and some of the economics behind things, and people not really feeling that regional filmmakers are quote unquote up to par, which I feel is, you know, a huge mistake on behalf of a lot of people, because they are the ones that actually know these stories inside out. This is their community. And why are we taking that from them? So we have a lot of work to do in terms of our industry and, you know, really putting the power back in the hands of the people who are best to tell that story. And so that's what I try to fight for a lot within our the Equity and Inclusion Committee specifically, just trying to figure out how we can shift this balance and put it back into the hands of the people that really need to be telling these stories.
And so,
If I can just add to the, so, you know, we haven't gotten to all the committees yet, but when we were really working on the Equity and Inclusion Committee, I think we started to have more meaningful conversations about what does inclusion mean? What does this word mean? Who do we want to include? I think for a bunch of us, we had the opportunity to also to go to Getting Real 2018, where there were these conversations about decolonizing the industry. There was a whole series of conversations about the decolonizing docs that was they were really kind of incredible conversations, and got, I think, a lot of people, when I talk about like breaking it down, it really kind of got a lot of us thinking. And up until 2018, we were kind of in steering committee mode, and we had this, what do we call it?
Come to Jesus.
Well, yeah, we had that too. But up to get, but we had this thing that to be a member of the DPA that you had to produce at least 2 independent documentary films. Now we were in steering committee mode, so we were trying to figure out what are the issues that we as an industry have to tackle. We were kind of trying to rely on a certain brain trust, I guess I would say. But I think that around mid-2018, and certainly by Getting Real, we had a flawed idea about what constitutes a brain trust, and that if we were going to talk about inclusion, that we actually had to really open our doors. And opening our doors also didn't mean that people needed to come to us. It meant that as an organization, we needed to go to them, because not everybody might be able to come to us. So first of all, so by 2018, we got rid of the barrier to entry. So you don't have, if you identify as a producer, if you identify as a director-producer, you can join us. But we also decided that if we're really going to be inclusive, we need to reach people where they are, so that and that's what kind of prompted this new regional committee that is in the nascent phase. There's going to be a regional chair, and then we're hoping that regions decide to band together. And it is so also that we have just so benefited from the collaboration and the collegiality and the support. And it certainly has helped me build bonds in New York. So if you're in Durham and there's a collective that you can meet with and talk with, it's about community building, starting at the ground up in some ways. And I don't know if you want,
Sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but I think that there's so many barriers to this industry that feel really closed. If you're not on the inside, meaning, no offense, if you're not a white man or a white woman from New York or LA, like, how do you get into this game? And so that was some of the messaging that I think we kind of changed and reiterated a little bit, because, there's a lot of people making a lot of films and we want everybody to feel included, but there's a lot of intimidation about trying to approach and get into the circles that have, for a long time purposefully tried to keep you out. And so, we're trying to break down a lot of those walls and destigmatize and really welcome people into the fold to join, no matter where you are in this landscape. If you're just starting out, if you're a veteran, if you've been making short films in Mississippi for 20 years, come join us. We really want you. If you've just picked up a camera last week and you want to make a film, but you don't know where to start, come join us. We have a place for you.
So I guess kind of building on that, one of the things that's really impressive, so this is kind of a two-part question for the panel, and for Naomi as well, for everybody on the panel. But you all have done a phenomenal job of partnering with every documentary organization that's out there, the small regional documentary organizations and the what I would consider to be the elite or the top of the industry, everything from Sundance to Brown Girls Doc Mafia. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you went about securing those partnerships, because it's a really huge slate. But secondly, as an organization, in order, the institutions that exist around the community play a direct role in exclusion. So to what extent is the organization going to become an advocate to help break down those barriers and challenge the institutional racism that exists to a certain extent?
It's hard to, change something that's been so systematic. I mean, the entire origin of our country is founded around this. So it's like trying to change it within the film industry is a huge hurdle in itself. And, I think it's something that we are trying to actively kind of tackle piece by piece. The crediting guideline was a huge step in that first direction of getting a little bit of parity in this industry. And, I think that one of the things that happened during the crediting process is that it's like, hey, wait, what about everybody else? And so that's our next step, is tackling inclusion. And, we don't know exactly what form it's going to be. It might be another white paper. It might be another set of guidelines, but these things take time. So we're working on it.
Could I say something from the development
Yes.
committee perspective on this?
Sure.
So, this is number 3 in the committees is development funding. So what that is, that committee that I was tasked with 2 years ago was basically, and I imagine this came out of the dinner you guys had, was just this observation that in the documentary field, there's just generally speaking a big lack of early stage funding. So, when a project is an idea or an early stage of development, pre-production, very hard to get money. There's not a lot out there, and what is out there is very competitive. So it was just kind of like this observation and kind of a call to explore this deeper. So we started doing is having a bunch of conversations with filmmakers and funders and other stakeholders about this question. Sure enough, kind of find out that a lot of people are having the same experience, which is that not only is that stage of filmmaking being very poorly resourced, but it's also highly exclusive. Mm-hmm. So just to go back, it's like inclusion doesn't exist without exclusion. Mm-hmm. And so what that does and where it connects, I feel like directly, what we were then hearing and feeling was that this issue was a direct contributor to excluding a whole lot of people from making their first film. And honestly, the even dirtier secret was that it was keeping a whole lot of celebrated filmmakers from making their second film or their third film. And oftentimes, these are filmmakers who are people of color, women, people, disabled filmmakers. Like go down the list of people who have all sorts of cards that may be stacked against them institutionally or structurally. So I think that what we've been really then trying to look at is how can you take these huge issues like structural racism in the country or even in our field and then look at specific objectives that could be organized and acted upon by filmmakers that could make some sort of difference. And that's, I don't know yet, we're still trying to figure out what could be the intervention that we work on, like crediting guidelines as it relates to development funding. We're trying to figure out, is there a way that we can come at something like development funding that can be expressly designed as an intervention to address how it affects equity and inclusion at that early stage.
One thing I wanted to bring in answer to that, when the DPA came to Southern Doc Fund, we did recommend a change, or I recommended a change around the consulting producer credit, because at SDF we were getting a lot of, it's a thing for us where we're trying to support makers in the South, and yet we were, so when people come in from New York or LA to tell a Southern story, we're saying there's people here who can collaborate with you to tell that story at the very least. If not, tell it themselves and have more awareness of have more of the nuance that complex region deserves, right? Or that story deserves. So we kind of pushed back on that because there were people who were throwing up a credit for people who maybe they had one phone conversation with. And when Sam Pollard was on the Doxa White panel at Full Frame, he said he's seen his name in credits where he just had one phone conversation with a person. So, so that was something we're trying to be mindful of. And then also, we're also looking at redefining success. So we want to redefine what is a successful documentary. If your documentary is reaching the audiences it was intended to reach, and you have a pathway to that, that's a successful documentary. So the gatekeeping is so freaking narrow of what is a professional in our industry. Is the Sundance premiere of the Netflix deal, there's an entire range of documentaries of strong work that gets ignored because it's not meant for that. And so the hope is that those that we can redefine what success looks like with the DPA.
Yeah, but I do think that redefining success has to mean that you can make a living doing what you're doing, ideally. And I think that is often sort of, and I know you think this too, but I mean, it's often left out of the equation. And it's really critical, like if you are, it's just critical to the conversation too. Should I talk about the crediting Do people know about the crediting guidelines? Because I think we keep on referencing them, and maybe I should just. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to go to that. I just want to throw in one other thing about the role of the organization in working with your partners to sort of crack the code on how decisions are made about projects and who's included and who's not included. As an organization, I think one of the most important things that you all can do is advocate for a diverse panel of decision makers. Because when all of the decision makers look like one group of people, it is sometimes even natural for people to gravitate to stories and people and cultures and communities that they know and understand, but not so much communities that they don't. So I think that could be an interesting priority for the organization around inclusivity, is to advocate for diversity around those decision makers. Not just people that they're hiring as consultants, but people that are part of the organizations and the senior management and their boards, because it all trickles down sooner or later.
Through the process of being part of the DPA, I think that we've all learned that we are also, as producers, gatekeepers. We make the hires on many times, or we recommend hires. We help build our teams, and so we are responsible to making sure that our productions are inclusive, that we are paying people appropriately. I had someone reach out to me a couple months ago and said, "I'm looking. Can you make a recommendation? I'm looking for a free intern to work on my production." And I'm not always as tactful as I should be. It's something I'm working on. But I was like, you're barking up the wrong tree, because I think that interns have to be paid. Because if you're not paying an intern, you are immediately excluding a whole swath of people who want to enter the film industry and might not be able to afford working for free. So anyway, I just want to add that yes, we need to advocate. We all need to advocate that the gatekeepers are inclusive and represent a broad swath of our society, but we have to recognize that each of us actually, when we're making decisions, that we're gatekeepers. And I think that's something that I've definitely learned being part of the group. So we issued that kind of manifesto at Getting Real in 2016. We started forming committees in early 2017, and by mid-2017, we decided that we wanted to have more impact at Getting Real in 2018. It's an major industry gathering, and it would be an opportunity for us to sort of take things to the next stage. We were starting to break out committees, and I volunteered to be the chair of the crediting committee. In its very earliest stages, I was chair because I was so tired of working years on a film, giving it everything that I had, working to, for example, get it into a festival, and suddenly becoming anonymous, never being included in the festival program, just not seen. So that was like my early entree into the crediting dialogue. But we ended up forming a committee. We were 6 people to start, and then a woman named Maggie Bowman in Chicago kind of came in the last 3 months to help keep the ship afloat, and was extraordinary. And we started just really thinking about crediting guidelines. And what we were quite discouraged by was a practice whereby Jameka would work 6, 9, 12, 18 months on a project producing it.
I have worked on projects for 12 months and not gotten a credit for them. 2, actually.
Okay, so that's one example. And we were also, but we were seeing that funders were contributing to projects and then taking a producer credit, so that they were literally buying a credit, so that some had the privilege to buy a credit that others had to work for. And we were really tired of this practice. No one ever buys a director credit. Why do they think that they can buy a producer credit? So I think that was the very beginning of how do we divide funder credits from day-to-day producer credits. But then we also realized that there was no standard to how funders were actually getting credited. So we were seeing a practice of, let's say, a $600,000 movie, someone coming in with $10,000 and demanding an executive producer credit. Now, many filmmakers, you need the $10,000 to get to the next stage. So then you're caught, well, do I give the executive producer credit to this person or not? Because once you give away your executive producer credit, $10,000, you can't leverage that credit to get more. Because in our industry, credits are currency. So we felt like splicing the crediting from funder credits to day-to-day producer credits then meant that we had to sort of standardize the fundraising tiers. And then creating the fundraising tiers then led to us really defining the roles, because also there had been no definitions. There had been no clarity. And even with our own industry, we felt like within the industry, people don't know what producers do. I showed up at a festival that's been going for like 10 years, talking to the festival director, and he says, so you're the producer. You're the one who just goes and gets the money, right? And I was like, do you think that's all a producer does? He's like, well, isn't it? And so I realized, wow, they're like, even within the industry, there's a lack of understanding. We then had to just deal with this issue of, in order to get the credit, there is an issue of access. And Jameka was a real force in holding us accountable to the relationship between access and crediting. And not the only one, there were many. But she was a
outspoken advocate.
And I'm really grateful for it. So I guess I just want to say, so these are kind of the way I'm describing how the document is sort of broken down, but we arrived at this in collaboration with organizations in the field. So I just want to say we thought it was going to take 16 months, or 6 months to create this document. It took about 18. It became a near full-time job in the last 3 months. But so, what we did is by about July, so we had a goal of June of 2018, we would have a rough cut of the crediting document. And we all of us had different relationships with organizations, and we shared the rough cut with different organizations, and we had one-on-one conversations with the organizations that would be like an hour long, where they gave us the feedback, and we had a document where we tracked all the feedback, and we had a month where we were getting all the feedback. And by the time we got the feedback from the rough cut, we realized we were more at an assembly than a rough cut. Anyway, we worked on the document, and I guess I would say we kind of got it to a fine cut by Getting Real. And at Getting Real, we did a crediting panel. We presented what we were doing. We got feedback from the community, and then we had to go in even deeper. And I think that probably our goal then was to publish in advance of Sundance of 2019. The period from November to about January 15th was brutal. Once organizations knew that we were publishing, they really held us to task, and it became much more demanding. We started working more closely with other committees, like the Inclusion Committee, to how do we deal with inclusion language. Naomi came forward. It's so fascinating. The consultant-producer definition was such a lightning rod. There was so much discussion around that. The funniest thing is that we started triaging so many definitions that then one of our members, Sabrina Gordon, was like, the producer definition is really not strong. Like, we realized, yeah. So anyway, it was a whole process. So for us, this crediting document is sort of has been our next. We did the first manifesto, we did the crediting document, and now the other committees are sort of all working, and we're really figuring out what's going to come next, what's going to kind of be the next best practice that we put forth. And that's what we're really trying to do, is recommend best practice for an industry that doesn't really have that many of them.
Yeah,
Oh, go.
yeah, and I would just like to just throw out that we're in an age where anybody can pick up a camera and go out and make a film. And, I think that that's a great thing, but also the reality is that this is a business. This is a film industry. And so I just urge everyone to really review the crediting guidelines and treat your film like it is a business. I think that you'll attract more funders by treating it like a business, because there is a tendency to treat it as a side project while you are actually doing your day job and making money. I mean, that's the reality of what this is, but you really have to treat this like your second business.
To kind of wrap things out, I would love to hear the definition of the consulting producer, because that came up a lot. And then I'd really like to go straight to the audience, because these are guidelines that you're encouraging them to apply to their films. So I'd like to see if people have any questions about how to apply what you've seen in your documents to the work that you're doing now. So Naomi, do you want to talk a little bit about the consulting producer definition?
Well, everyone's got the document. I guess you can read it. It's a pretty simple, straightforward line, really. And I think what was important, and maybe not even just for the consulting producer credit, really, is to think about who's got the power, where the power lies in the development of the story arc and the choices made, and all of that. So the consulting producer does not typically have control over the final edit, and it was important to say. After talking to someone like Sam Pollard, who was saying he was seeing himself credited as that after one phone call.
So does anybody have questions? Okay, great.
When I talk about access, I'd like everyone to sort of chime in a little bit, because I think Lance and I and Jameka all think about access, and we think about it maybe in different ways, and I might not be super coherent, but I feel like there are people who have access to decision makers, to grantors, to broadcasters, because they've been in the game, but there are people whose voices really need to be heard in this field. Whose stories, who should be able to tell the stories that they want to tell, but they might not have an entry point. They might not have the financial support that they need. They might not have the mentorship. They just might not have a way in, and they might not know, and they might not know even how to start to have a way in. And I think that how can we be an industry that gives these voices entry? And I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking of people who are differently abled. I'm talking about older filmmakers. When we were having this conversation about inclusion, and there was a woman, and she said, I'm single. I'm not married. I don't have a support network. I'm in my 60s. Like, is this a field that I can be a part of? And for me, I always really remember that. And access is, how can Detroit filmmakers, feel supported and in the fold and, to do the work that they want to do. So I think that's a rough, that's what I kind of mean by it. Do you want to?
I'll quickly sum it up and say that this business and access are about economics. And if you are not someone who had the privilege of growing up with a trust fund, or if you're not married to an investment banker husband, you might not have the access to really make films. And it's a problem because we're getting a lot of stories and perspectives that are told from a single gaze, which is not the reality of what this country actually is. And that's what we need to change. So that's my short and abbreviated answer about access.
And I think that, just add that I think that there's this incumbent responsibility that if you do have access, or if you, whether you were born with it or have achieved it, then how do you look at using that access to also open up access to others rather than just kind of, climbing up the ladder and kicking it off the roof so no one else can follow after you. So I think that the nature of a lot of the organizing that the DPA has done is that, while there are a lot of struggles in the, experienced by a lot of the members, they have accomplished, each individual person has accomplished incredible things. And they're looking at, even still, how can they leverage that experience to help or improve the access to others, and not just only be selfish, think about their own work or their own project or career.
So we have time for about 2 more questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. The question was, is there a case study or an example of a film that is adhering to their credit, so that their credit guidelines, so that people could look to that?
The film that I'm producing right now, it hasn't come out yet, but it's using the guidelines. And I think we've heard that a lot of members who are actively producing films are using the guidelines. They only came out about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So.
I think the guidelines are also what you make of it. I'm working on 2 projects right now by 2 women of color directors, specifically Lloyd Ball, who is with Firelight Films. And we specifically had the mandate of hiring everyone who was going to work with us from an underrepresented community. So it's actually like mostly women of color that are working on this film, from the DP to the producer, director, editor, even our production assistants. I mean, that was our specific mandate. So I think that you have to, and it's not easy. I mean, the reality is that there's not a lot of Black producers, there's not a lot of Black editors, it's hard sometimes to find people. And I think people use that as an excuse sometimes, but there are people out there. Just find them, hire them, and make that commitment, whatever your specific position might be.
This is just a plug for any DC, Maryland, Virginia area people who are interested in getting involved. I am the point person for the area, so just please come find me afterwards. We unfortunately actually have very light representation in the DPA from this area at the moment, so we would be thrilled to have some more people get involved. So just come find me.
I also just want to shout out to AFI, AFI DOCS, because anyway, for holding this panel, and also, I spent 3 years trying to get producers recognized in the program at AFI DOCS, and I was really thrilled that this year producers were included in the program. And So it means, I just want you to know, has meant a lot to the DPA, and it takes a leadership position, and hopefully other festivals will follow. And it's a small thing, but it really does mean a lot to us. And so it's really great to be here as a producer this year, so thank you.